Hello everyone, how's everyone doing? Today I'm going to prove to you that someone's idea or how they view God can be different to the way someone else or another person views God. You see, I don't hold with this idea that God is love. I hold with another idea. I want to prove it to you. I don't want to say too much at this stage now because what I have to show you and what I have to demonstrate to you, you will then draw your own conclusions that when you view God as love, that only will relate to whether you actually love God yourself. If you don't love God and you have a disdain for him, then this God of love fantasy just won't happen in your case. So I'm going to now set about proving to you and giving you a biblical example. These are three examples of the nation of Israel, my favorite people to draw comparisons to. And I'm going to show you that there's a difference between three types of murmurings. A murmuring can be conceived as a complaint, a legitimate complaint, and a murmuring can also be conceived as dissension and rebellion. And the way Jehovah reacts to these three instances of murmuring and complaining is further proof that God isn't always a God of love. So let's get into it, shall we? Thank you. Okay, so to show you this example, I will need to be sat down. I'll need to have my hands free so that I can operate the keyboard and what have you. And what we're going to do, we're going to use the publication we're all familiar with, but we could really have just chose any Bible. We could have done the King James Version if we wanted. But I'm going to choose this one. And we're going to go into number 16. A lot of people say, oh man, you don't really reference the Bible that much, do you? And it's true, I don't. But today I'm going to reference this. And the reason why I'm going to bring this to everyone's attention is because last night I remembered an old drama when I was living in Sydney, Australia. Korah, Dathan and Abiram. Now, before I get really into this story, we need to go back to the first instance of complaining or murmuring. And for me, this showed a side of Jehovah that was what I expected for such a complaint. And that complaint was that they weren't particularly happy about eating the same old food all the time. This, for me, was a legitimate complaint. I didn't actually see it as murmuring myself, but I think Jehovah brings it to Moses' attention that he's aware that they've been complaining about their food. So what Jehovah does, he rewards them because they've brought this complaint and it was a legitimate one. Who wants to be eating the same food all the time? I don't. So Jehovah must have used a bit of empathy here and decided that yes, they're quite right. You know, how boring to be eating manna from heaven all the time. Let me give them something different. And so he provided the quail. So this is one instance of murmuring or complaining, even though it is in a mild degree, that went rewarded. This instant went rewarded. And that is a significant point. So that shows the side to Jehovah that we'd all expect. This God of love and this compassionate creator and someone that was able to use empathy and put himself into the position of humans to see that it really wasn't ideal to be eating the same food all the time. But now we move into another example of murmuring. Now, this is the one which I remember a drama in Sydney, Australia in the 70s. And they reenacted this particular scene. Korah, Dathan and Abiram were probably the ringleaders. These were probably the prominent spokespeople for their particular encampment or their group. Now, they too will have seen that Moses had been selected, that Moses had been chosen to be the leader of the nation of Israel. So there can be no doubt in their mind if they saw all these miracles that Moses was able to bestow. But this is quite a significant point now. Jehovah at this stage had probably read their hearts. He'd probably looked into their hearts and realised they probably weren't going to change. There probably was no sign of repentance in their hearts, even if it was pointed out to them. So they set about murmuring about Moses, and does Moses really have the right to lead the children of Israel? So Moses, at this point, he sets this little test. Quite interesting. Because I think even at this early stage now, Jehovah was allowing Moses the chance for these men to atone themselves, for them to come to their senses. But I actually think that Jehovah at this stage had already marked them for death, because he was able to look into their hearts, and that's what the Creator does. He looks into the hearts of someone, and he can then decide whether that person is at some point in their life going to stop doing their former course, if it's something that goes contrary to what he would expect. And if they're going to continue on that course, I think he can read their heart sufficiently enough to sometimes harden it. And I think what's happened here is that Moses, with Aaron, were hoping that they'd change their mind, these three. Because these three represented, the chieftains, weren't they? They were, it says 250 Israelite men, chieftains of the assembly, chosen ones of the congregation, and prominent men. So they already had a privileged position. You know, I mean, the average person amongst the nation of Israel probably would never get to be anywhere near the holy things. But these men already had a great position, but that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. But Jehovah decided at this stage now to do this, what could it be described as? An act where everybody can see that to talk against what Jehovah had already sort of set in stone and already pointed, to talk against it is to rebel against the Creator. It's like to say that you don't agree with Jehovah's choice. This is how I see it. And so he told them at the time, anybody around them, to move away from their camp. Don't touch anything belonging to those three, and make some distance between yourselves and them. And that's what they did. But Moses still was holding out hope, and I think he was saying that, well, if you don't fall down in death, then Jehovah's made his choice. But then again, if the ground opens up and swallows you, that's not going to be on my head. This is what Moses said. That will be because of what our sovereign Lord Jehovah has decided. And that's exactly what happened. So Jehovah didn't allow this murmuring to go on too long. Probably heard, you know, maybe a few days earlier what these men were plotting, and then read their hearts, and then decided that this is something that you have to act on really, really quickly. And modern congregations today do the same. They don't allow murmuring to go on. But if they hear anybody murmuring, they ask, well, the elders and obviously the ones in the congregation that deal with these things, they stop it really quick, because murmuring, dissension and rebellion, had it have gone on amongst the nation of Israel, would have drove a wedge right between the whole lot of them. It would have just divided them, scattered them, and made them not a unified force, because they wouldn't have then listened to Moses. So that's why Jehovah decided that he must deal with it as quickly as possible, and that's what he did. And here's another interesting thing, because this conversation I'm having with you today is trying to prove to you that how you see God is love, he's compassionate. It's not always the case. When the ground opened up, it swallowed up their wives and their children. So Jehovah had opened up the ground in earthquake fashion, and they went down to the grave alive. Men, women and children. So Jehovah had decided that the whole lot of them had to go. And what do you think about that? Well, that's not the end of the matter. Because a little later on, I think it's probably the next day, I think it's saying the next day, they start complaining about why these men were killed. Oh yeah, this is an interesting point as well. 15. Was Moses really saying here that he hadn't really treated these men badly at all in 15? Moses became angry and said to Jehovah, do not turn to look at their grain offering. Not one donkey I've taken away from them, nor have I harmed one of them. So I think Moses is saying to Jehovah that he hasn't been a taskmaster and been harsh with these men, so he couldn't really understand their attitude. It almost seems as if him and Jehovah were just siding that what had to be done, had to be done. Right, this is the little test, isn't it, here? Moses said to Korah, present yourself with all your supporters before Jehovah tomorrow, you and they Aaron. Each one should take a fire holder and put incense on it, and each will present his fire holder before Jehovah, 250 fire holders together with you and Aaron, each with his own fire holder. So they did this, and this was like a little test. Now, I was just wondering whether this test was something that Jehovah wanted, or whether this was Moses basically saying to Jehovah, let's give him a chance. Let's see. Let's see if these are the ones you've selected. So this is the test. But for me, this was almost like a lame sacrifice to Jehovah, because I actually think that Jehovah had already decided that they were going to die before this point. But the test went ahead, nevertheless. And here's what I mentioned earlier. Sons and their little children. So little children, wives and sons, went down into the ground alive. The ground opened up and swallowed them. All the tents of Korah, Dathan and Abiram, and all those that were listening to them. You see, that's another thing. Listening to murmuring is another significant point that Jehovah doesn't like, does he? But this is where Moses says, by this is when they've set the test, by this you will know that Jehovah has sent me to do these things. So yes, he's saying to the whole nation of Israel that if he's not successful, then he wasn't meant to be chosen. You will know that Jehovah has sent me to do these things. That is not of my own heart. So yeah, he's saying, look, I've no choice. I have to do it. If I was given a choice, I probably wouldn't do it. I think that's what he's meant by that there. That is not of my own heart. That's the kind of thing I'd probably say. If I was appointed as a leader and I had to do something like that, I'd have to carry out implicit instructions, but I'd probably have a footnote later to say, this is not what I want to do. This is what I've been asked to do. And I think that's what Moses was saying there. But this is interesting as well in 29. So he says, if these people were to die a natural death, then their punishment is the same as that of all mankind. Then Jehovah has not sent me. So yeah, this is a humility act here now from Moses. He's more or less saying that these men, go on to prosper and live and, just live out their life after this test. Then Jehovah hasn't sent me. So he's saying, then I'm nothing. Then I was never meant to be chosen. So this is putting Jehovah now in a position to act. He can only act, can't he? So Jehovah does something extraordinary with them, and the ground opens, swallows them, and everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the grave. And why? Because they treated Jehovah disrespectfully, you see. Jehovah had chosen, and Jehovah will choose or appoint who he wants. And it isn't for anybody to say otherwise. That's the lesson here. So this is the play in which I remember in the late 70s in Sydney, Australia. This is it. This is where we had them come over from America and do the dramatisation. And I was only a young teenager at the time, but I remember it. And we had sound effects and everything. So, you know, when the earthquake scene came, we was in our chairs, and the speaker systems were turned up extra loud, so the earthquake went. So we had all that. Yeah, it was actually quite a good dramatization. They did it really well. Okay, that's the second instance of murmuring, right? But we've got these 250 men, haven't we, that offered up this lame sacrifice. 250 men who offered up a lame sacrifice. I think at this point now, Jehovah had already decided that it was immaterial. You know, these fire holders and the incense, it was all immaterial. But I think just allowed Moses to, you know, get them to carry it out and just to see what happens. And this is it. So Jehovah now says to Moses and the priest to take the fire holders out of the fire, for they are holy, and also tell him to scatter the fire some distance away. The fire holders are the men who sinned at their cost and at their lives, because Jehovah had decided their sacrifice was lame. So fire came out and consumed all 250 of them, because Jehovah didn't recognize their sacrifice at all. It wasn't of the heart, was it? And it wasn't called for. It wasn't necessary. But is that the end of the matter? No. You see, the murmuring goes on, doesn't it? And this is the section here. Then the very next day, the whole assembly of the Israelites began to murmur against Moses and Aaron. So this is a third instance of murmuring. A third instance. The first instance was a legitimate complaint about the food, and Jehovah rewarded the children of Israel and provided them with quail. The second instance was the three Levites who were murmuring, who were jealous of Moses and his position and wanted that adulation and praise for themselves. Jehovah knew this at probably the earliest stage when he read their hearts. He knew they weren't going to change. But Moses then set up this little test. Jehovah obviously knew that this was immaterial, but allowed it to go ahead. He'd already decided that they had to die, and so did their wives, children that were connected with them, the whole camp. But then the third instance, you wouldn't have thought, would you, that there would be a third instance? But yeah, we have one. And the very next day, the whole assembly, they began to murmur against Moses, saying, "Oh, you two have put Jehovah's people to death." This is what they don't get it. They just did not understand. What is up with these Jews? They just didn't get it. You've put Jehovah's people to death. When the assembly had gathered together, Moses and Aaron, they then turned toward the tent of meeting, and look, the cloud covered it. Now this was Jehovah becoming indignant, because he'd just witnessed a third act of murmuring. He didn't think he'd see a third act of murmuring, probably, because he thought that after that second one, people would be conforming. But stupid Israelites decided to have another crack at Moses. And so this was it. This was Jehovah becoming indignant and furious, very furious, because at this stage now, he unleashes a plague because of what they've just said. So the cloud comes over, the plague is unleashed. So I actually think, can't prove this, but I actually think at this stage now that Jehovah had stopped communicating with Moses and Aaron because he was furious, indignant, furious, couldn't believe it. And I think he was about to wipe out all 3 million at this stage. Now you can shout me down if you can prove me wrong, but what was the only thing that stopped the plague? It was when Aaron offered up an atonement sacrifice, because Moses and Jehovah weren't communicating now, because I think Jehovah was about to wipe them all out. So he says to him, "Remove yourself from among the assembly, that I may exterminate them in an instant." And they all fell to their faces. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take the fire holder, put it in the fire of the altar, and in it put the incense, and go quickly to the assembly and make atonement." And this is what I've just said. Because Jehovah was about not not just about to exterminate these men on the third instances of murmuring, but the plague would have worked its way right through the nation of Israel. So Aaron, because Moses knew that Jehovah was furious and he knew that Jehovah was about to vent his anger, he then said to him to make this atonement sacrifice and be quick about it, really, because the indignation has gone out from Jehovah. The plague has started. So what do you learn now about Jehovah? You've already had an example where he's killed men, women and children, and they've gone alive into the ground. You already know about the antediluvian period where he flooded a whole world, men, women and children. And now we have an instance here where this plague that started by Jehovah would have killed every one of them. But Jehovah finally accepted the atonement sacrifice, and the scourge or the plague eventually stopped. But the point at which it stopped, 14,700 had died on account of Korah. Wow. God is love. No. God is only love to those that love him. And if you don't love God and you talk and question his authority, then he's far from love to you. Far from love. He's a powerful, powerful creator who doesn't really need to be put in a box. That seems to be what people do these days. They put God in a box and they get him out when it suits them. When it suits them, because they're having, difficulties in life. And then they start to pray to God, thinking that by praying to God, he's just going to come out a big hand like that and only help them and no one else. We call this cherry picking, don't we? Special treatment. Oh yeah, just for you. I don't think that is God at all. So this doesn't look good now for the last days. If this account here can be relied on, I mean, check it out on King James Version and all the rest of the Bibles, but I'm sure you'll find it's the same thing. Now this doesn't look good at all, does it, for the final last days? God is love, eh? Is he? Well, he might be to them that love him. But there's an awful lot of people in this world that don't love God. And so those that don't love God will know his indignation. They will know the anger of him. And that's what I want to try and point out. Because I've never really had this fantasy view that Christendom has of God. That he's all forgiving. Yes, repentance is a good thing. And through repentance you can be forgiven. But Jehovah can look into the heart, can't he? He can look into the person's heart. He must have done that with the 3 Levites. But it's the 3 Levites that were the mouthpieces or the spokes men for the whole encampment, because probably the whole encampment were in support of the 3 Levites, Korah, Dathan and Abiram. And so that's why they had to die. So to listen to people that murmur today or to support them is something I don't do. I don't need to. I don't need to listen to the apostate community and all their sniping and backbiting and murmuring. I don't need to listen to it because it's unfounded. I mean, go after wrongdoers. Yes, I'm not saying not to do that. Go after them that are breaking the law. But to classify everybody, no, I can't do that. I can't tar everyone with the same brush because that isn't the way I've been brought up. I think you need to give people the benefit of the doubt and stop clumping them all together.